Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. There are many components to the wonderful legacy of William Wellman. Aviator, pioneer, war hero, and movie pioneer. But probably the greatest components of that wonderful legacy that we can still have the privilege of enjoying is his son, William Wellman Jr., an accomplished and acclaimed movie pioneer in his own right, who has consented to share some of that legacy with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, William Wellman Jr.
I was back there thinking about my father, who was a fighter pilot in the First World War, and the people that he cared the most about were pilots. I mean, he directed some of the greatest stars in the silver screen, Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, Robert Mitchum, John Wayne, on and on and on, but pilots were the people he cared about. And I think he would love to be here today. But I'm happy to be able to tell you about him. I also have my book about his life and a video, and I'm going to show you a little short 8-minute piece to familiarize you a little bit with my father and the work that he did in the film industry.
He was Wild Bill Wellman. And he was wild because he was wild. He was from a wild era of filmmaking.
He took no guff. He gave better than he got. He was a very strong personality.
He got what he wanted. He just said, "That's it!" He'd clap his hands or he'd jump up and down and really get excited.
All right, now listen. See, the plane's on fire. They were over here. 48, it's going to be like that. I couldn't understand what the hell he was saying. How many says on? All right, and do it now.
But geez, he bumped into me and he said, "What the hell are you doing, kid? For God's sake, give me the goddamn..." And I turned around and said, "You son of a bitch, fuck you!"
He was not afraid to tell you what he thought. If he didn't like the way it was going, you knew it right now. There was no subtlety in Bill.
He was clearly somebody that was going to go mine life for some of its deeper treasures, and he would bring it to his work, which he did.
He could be very intimidating, but underneath that, he was a pussycat.
No sentimentality. You're a two-fisted guy. You're a two-gun guy. You're out front with everything. But I saw him when he was sentimental.
Not knowing what they had, executives at Paramount were prepared to write the whole Wings misadventure off as a costly mistake. And antipathy toward Wellman was so strong that he wasn't even invited to the opening of his own film. But people came in droves, and the studio found itself with a blockbuster on its hands. While the success of the film was undeniable, the studio still managed not to invite Wellman to the first Academy Awards presentation, for which Wings won the first Oscar ever given for Best Picture. A Star is Born was a smash. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, and Wellman shared an Oscar with Robert Carson for Best Original Story. It went on to be remade twice, in the 50s with Judy Garland and James Mason, and in the 70s with Barbra Streisand and Chris Christopherson. So successful was A Star Is Born that Wellman and Selznick continued their collaboration with Nothing Sacred, teaming Frederick March, this time with formidable comedic talent Carole Lombard. The film is considered a hallmark example of the screwball comedies of the 30s. William Wellman and Darryl Zanuck made The Oxbow Incident, a shocking morality play that explored the grim reality of mob hysteria and the need for tolerance. 1939 was a benchmark year that epitomized the golden years of Hollywood, with pictures like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. In that year, Wellman would offer one of his most popular films, his remake of Beau Geste, starring Gary Cooper, Ray Milland, and Robert Preston. Apart from being one of the all-time great adventure stories, Beau Geste is a shining example of Wellman's affinity for family. In this retelling, 3 separately adopted brothers run off to join the French Foreign Legion. Along with them goes the secret of the blue water, a prized family gem that has been stolen. In the end, though, the stone comes to be a metaphor for the deep love and honor that holds the Gestes together. The story of G.I. Joe was different from war films that had come before for 2 reasons: Ernie Pyle and William Wellman. The film would be a composite of Pyle's first-hand view of the war and of the soldiers with whom he shared foxhole and jungle hammock. He was the quiet voice and conscience of the fighting men on the ground, and among foot soldiers of the war, no journalist was better respected or more deeply loved. The story of G.I. Joe was to be Wellman's masterpiece, and he would always regard it among his finest work. In Yellow Sky, Gregory Peck plays a good bad guy and abandons his gang for the daughter of a last holdout prospector in a long-dead ghost town.
He told me that whole story in Yellow Sky, and he told it with such zest and terrific love for it and enthusiasm. To him, it was just going to be a great, great picture of the Old West, a great story, a great set of characters. The enthusiasm was really contagious, and if I could use the word, it was endearing. You liked the guy because he loved what he was going to do.
In Westward the Women, a story written by his friend Frank Capra, Wellman directed a cast of 200 women heading west to become brides for a colony of male settlers. They were depicted with extraordinary bravery and stamina as a tribute to the pioneering spirit in those women who braved the western frontier. Wellman's partnership with John Wayne bore 5 pictures. 2 of these, Island in the Sky and The High and the Mighty, drawn from Gann's novels, starred Wayne himself, and each picture offered departures from Wayne's more familiar screen persona. The High and the Mighty tapped into the audience's visceral fear of loss of control and played them out in the cabin of a commercial airliner. It gave them the vicarious experience of trusting nature, technology, and the abilities of the people in the cockpit. It was a whole new kind of horror film, and people loved it. The result defined an emerging archetype and film genre that has been used as a blueprint for dozens of disaster films.
Welby, check your final position. I'm going to take her down.
Wait a few more minutes, Captain.
Do as I say.
It looks like...
Do as I say.
Give him a few more minutes.
I've already waited too long. Here we go.
No, we don't. Get a hold of yourself, you yellow.
In a directing career that spanned 35 years, Wellman's body of work garnered 32 Academy Award nominations. 4 were for Best Picture and 3 for Best Director. But Wellman's only Oscar would be the one he shared for the story of A Star Is Born. The Directors Guild, however, would bestow him with their highest honor, the D.W. Griffith Award for Lifetime Achievement.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a little bit about my old man. He had a troubled youth, shall we say. He was born on a leap year February 29th, 1896. He lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, and also Newton, suburbs of Boston. He learned to fight at an early age. He and his brother, who was 16 months older, they had to travel through ethnic communities before they could get to school, and oftentimes they had to fight their way to school. And my father continued with his fisticuffs, and this got him in lots of trouble. He was a tremendous athlete. He was a three sports letterman: football, baseball, and ice hockey. He was the captain of the ice hockey team, captain of the football team, but he spent so much time with his extracurricular activities that his grades were falling apart. And his senior year in high school, the headmaster suspended him from all activities and made him report after school to a second-floor classroom in order to graduate. My father had some problems with authority as well. And one day, in front of the whole student body, he dropped a stink bomb from the second-floor classroom on the bald head of the headmaster. And the name of William A. Wellman did not appear on a diploma. What it did appear in was as a professional ice hockey player in the Boston arena. And there he met Douglas Fairbanks. Now, we're talking 1914, 1913, just before the war broke out. And Douglas Fairbanks was a star of stage. He had not gotten into the movies yet. But he liked my father, and he told him that if he ever needed a job, to come out to Hollywood, because Fairbanks was going out to get into the movies. And eventually they would get together. So anyway, my father had some other troubles with the authority in those days. He was caught stealing cars. So he went before the judge, and he tried to explain to the judge that he never stole a car. He only borrowed them, and then he returned them to where he found them, oftentimes putting gas in the gas tank. But the judge didn't understand the difference between borrowing and stealing. But since my father had no prior convictions or anything, he had him report to the probation officer of the cities of Newton for 6 months. Amazingly, the probation officer of the city of Newton was his mother. So he reported to his mother every week for 6 months. About this time, he fell in love with flying. And during his ice hockey time, he met another gentleman who had a big made a big impression on his life. And his name was Earl Ovington, and he was a pioneer pilot. And my father used to travel up to Woburn, Massachusetts, to an airfield up there and talk to the pilots. And his family didn't have the money, couldn't take lessons, but he hung around the field. He got to know something about the planes and met all the pilots. And then when the war broke out, of course, America was neutral. And my father wanted to get into the war. He wanted to fly. He also wanted to get out of town. So the only way he could do it was he joined an ambulance corps, and that got him to France. Then he transferred into the French Foreign Legion for a sort of basic training, and from there he transferred into the Lafayette Flying Corps. Now he wanted to go into the Lafayette Escadrille, which was a very well-known unit that was just Americans. It was all Americans. But there was no room. There were so many Americans that had come over. There was no more room in the escadrille. And William K. Vanderbilt, the American industrialist, he fixed it up so that the Americans could join the French, the Lafayette Flying Corps, and that way they would join French units, but they would still have their American citizenship and their American identities. And when my father finished his flight training, he was sent to N87, N meaning Newport, in the Alsace-Lorraine section of France. And that was an all-French unit, and it was a very famed unit. They had many aces, and my father was the first American to join that unit. My father had 6 major air crashes during the war. He used to tell people that he never made a proper landing. But of course, he was in combat in late 1917 and early 1918, so I mean, he was there in the wintertime. So to try to land those Newports and Spads in the snow would have been quite difficult. But my father did have the opportunity to fly all the planes that were used during the war. And he was sent to a Newport unit, so that was the main plane that he flew during his time in the war. Now, there were 210 Americans that flew for France in the First World War. There were 100 casualties, but 73 of those pilots accounted for 199 confirmed victories, which I thought was always kind of a joke, because to get a confirmed victory, you had to have 2 pilots in your escadrille or squadron that would witness it. And a lot of times, when you're in dogfights and you're not looking around to see what everyone else is doing, and my father used to go on a lot of missions with one other pilot, so there wasn't 2 to witness anything. Another way was that ground observers or balloon observers would have to see what happened. And since a lot of action took place in enemy territory, there was nobody down there or up there that was looking out for you. So the last way was the one I thought was the most amazing, and my father depicted this in his movie Wings. If you shot a plane down, you had to land your plane, run over to the downed aircraft, and pull off the Iron Cross, get back in your plane, join the war again, and take it back to the headquarters. So, as you can imagine, the pilots of World War I didn't get all the credits that they deserved. But getting back to Douglas Fairbanks, my father got a cablegram from him when my father received the Croix de Guerre. My father he received the Croix de Guerre, one of their highest honors, and 2 gold palms. And each palm was like getting another Croix de Guerre. And Fairbanks cabled him, you know, good work, don't forget my offer. If you need a job, come out to Hollywood. And of course, by that time, Douglas Fairbanks was a major star. Well, my father's 6th crash was, he was shot down by anti-aircraft fire. And he always made a joke about that because he said they couldn't hit anything, but they hit him. His back was broken in 2 places. They put a silver plate in his head. The control stick of the plane went up into the roof of his mouth, and he was pretty busted up. They sent him home. He rehabbed at home, and they made a big deal out of this, because this is now March of 1918, and the returning airmen that went over and flew for France were quite heroic. And my father had a deluge of people. Even Teddy Roosevelt, the former president, wanted to see my father and met with him. But my father didn't care about that. He wanted to get back out to the front. And he had met somebody on one of his hospital trips in France who became important in the U.S. Air Force. And they got together, and my father was sent to Rockwell Field in San Diego as a flight instructor, where he finished the war. Now, his plane down there was a Spad, the newest Spad. And when the war ended, my father was wondering what was he going to do with the rest of his life. So he pulled out that cablegram, and he found out that Douglas Fairbanks was having a big polo party. And my father got in his silver Spad, and he flew up from San Diego and landed on the polo field. You can imagine the startling of the horses, and And he got out of his plane, and he had his uniform on and all his medals, and he marched up to Douglas Fairbanks, and everyone was at this party, Charlie Chaplin and all of the great stars. And he walked up to Fairbanks, and he said, "Mr. Fairbanks, do you remember me?" And Fairbanks says, "I remember you. You're Wild Bill," which is a nickname my father got in France. And Fairbanks said to my father, "Can you ride a horse?" And my father said, "No, but I've ridden everything else. I can learn." Well, Fairbanks gave him a starring role in his next picture, which was a Western called The Knickerbocker Buckaroo. And my father hated being an actor. When he saw the picture, he just didn't like it. So he went to Fairbanks and he said, "Look, I appreciate what you've done, but I don't want to be an actor. It's not for me." And Fairbanks says, "What do you want to do?" He says, "Well, how much do you pay your director?" Fairbanks told him, and my father said, "I'd like to be a director." Well, Fairbanks said, "I can't make you a director, but I'll get you started." And he got him the lowest rung job in the film industry, a messenger boy at the Goldwyn Studios. And my father eventually worked his way up. He was an assistant editor, he was a prop man, he was an assistant director, and then he got his start directing. And he was a director of B Westerns, Buck Jones and Dustin Farnham. And when a rising producer saw a film that my father had made and really took a liking to him and put him under contract and brought him to Paramount Studios in 1925, and the B.P. Schulberg was the producer who became the head of production at Paramount. And my father was under contract to him. And the first picture that my father directed at Paramount was not a Western, it was called The Cat's Pajamas. Now, it's a lost film, and my father used to always hope that it would stay that way. So now here comes Jesse Lasky's running the Paramount Studios, and Paramount is the #1 ranked studio in Hollywood. And Jesse Lasky and his partner Adolf Zucker, who stayed in New York, handled the financial end and built a big chain of theaters. They were the first moguls in Hollywood. And Jesse Lasky was looking for his big roadshow picture for 1927. And this is now January of 1926. Now the head of production, B.P. Schulberg, says to him, "You know who should direct this picture?" And Lasky said, "Which one of my great veteran directors do you think it should be?" Because Lasky always boasted that the reason Paramount was #1 is because he had the best directors under contract, Cecil B. DeMille and Victor Fleming and Alan Dwan, all these great directors. Well, B.P. Schulberg said, "I think William Wellman should direct Wings." And if Lasky was standing, he probably fell down at that, because he knew who Wellman was, but he was a B Western director, and he had directed 2 pictures since then that were pretty bad. One called The Boob, and of course the famous Cat's Pajamas. So Lasky didn't like the idea, but B.P. Schulberg said, "No, you've got to understand that Wellman is the only director under contract with frontline battle experience. He's the only one that would understand this movie, this Wings, which is the story of the Great War fought in the air." So Lasky still wasn't convinced. So he had a meeting with my father, and he said, "What makes you think you can direct my big roadshow picture better than my stable of fine directors?" And my father says, "My war record does. And I'll make it the best damn picture this studio's ever had." And that's the way my father talked. He liked to talk that way. So eventually Lasky thought, okay, and he took a chance. And my father got the job of directing Wings. Now, Wings was the grandfather of all aviation pictures. Never before had a feature been made about the Great War, fought in the air. And up to 1926, there had been very little aerial or aviation work in the movies. There had been stunts, there had been in short films, Max Sennett had some flying in some of his comedies. There was government films. There was miniatures. There were simulations. No actor had ever been photographed in the air. So what they were going to have to do was to invent the technology for aerial warfare for the movies. So the original budget of Wings was $1.2 million. And when Lasky went to his partner Zucker in New York and explained that it was going to cost $1.2 million to make this movie, and Zucker and the banker said, "Are you kidding? We're not giving you over $1 million for a movie about planes and pilots. I mean, what are planes? They're specks in the sky. Pilots, they all look the same with who's the good guys and the bad guys. They all look the same with their helmets and goggles on. No, we're not going to do it." So Lasky didn't want to lose his baby, and he had this writer, John Monk Saunders, who had written the original story for Wings and was a Rhodes Scholar and also a pilot. And so Lasky sent him to Washington, D.C. to try to get the War Department to maybe, give him some funds or at least men and equipment. So that went through a lot of problems, trying to find somebody in the War Department that wanted to back this movie. Although there was a great interest in flight at that time, but still, it had to go up through the chain of command all the way to the President of the United States. Calvin Coolidge signed off. They didn't give Paramount any money. They gave him $16 million worth of men and equipment, 5,000 troops, hundreds of planes and pilots, artillery, tanks. Paramount could have started one hell of a war if they want. And they chose San Antonio, Texas as the location because of its nearness to service bases and the fact the government had so much property down there that could be turned into France, which basically is what they did. They built a French village. They built a whole battlefield. And when my father came on board, the picture had been in pre-production for 4 months. And a lot of decisions that a director usually makes had been made by the studio hierarchy. And my father was not happy with this. Clara Bow had been cast. She was the first actor cast. And she was the #1 box office actor of the day. She was the it girl. And Lasky wanted to have only the best people that he had under contract at Paramount in every department because this picture was such a huge operation. So my father, the first thing he did was to throw out the male stars and hiring 2 unknowns, Buddy Rogers and Richard Arlen. So this started the problems with my father in the studio. Because you see, my father believed that no matter if you're under contract and you have to make whatever picture that they give you, whatever script they give you, you have to make it. No matter what, no matter how the script came to him, when it came to him and it was his, he wasn't going to allow any interference of any kind. And Jesse Lasky, running the studio, believed that directors were the captain of the ships, but he was the commander of the fleet. So he didn't like this upstart because my father was 29 years old when he came to Paramount. So there was a lot of trepidation here. So anyway, the company goes off to San Antonio, and the first thing that my father did was to throw away the first 2 months of aerial filming. Threw it away. Well, the studio was furious. It's not raining. How come you can't use this film? Well, the problem was the skies were gray and there were no clouds. And you have to have clouds as a backdrop for the planes to show speed and perspective. And the studio didn't understand that. My father understood it. And my father was not going to do anything that wasn't in the best interests of Wings. He also didn't like the idea that any time they had shot any aerial work before Wings, they simulated the actors on the ground. They were in the cockpits, they'd have wind machines, and the camera would be low shooting up and you'd see the sky, and they faked the fact that they were never in the air. Well, my father shot some stuff like that, and he didn't like it. He said, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing anything that's fake. So he went to his two stars, Buddy Rogers and Richard Arlen. He said, this is what we're going to do. You're going to take a few flying lessons, and you're going to fly the planes while you're being photographed. Now, I think to myself, can you imagine today somebody goes up to Brad Pitt and says, now, Brad, by the way, you're going to take some flying lessons, and you're going to fly the plane while you're being photographed, Well, Richard Arlen, fortunately, had some flying. He was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, but not a lot. Buddy Rogers, none. My father said that every take with Buddy Rogers in the air, when he came back and landed, he threw up. But he would go right back up. So what they would do is they would send the actors up in a two-cockpit plane. There'd be a safety pilot in one cockpit and the actor in the other. And when they reached a certain altitude, everything had been mapped out on the ground, what they were going to do. Then the safety pilot would duck down, and the actor would reach forward, turn on the motorized camera, and become the cameraman, the actor, the director, and the pilot for 400 feet, because there were 400-foot rolls in the cameras. So the amazing thing, when you see Wings, the actors are flying the planes while you see them in the air, So now the studio was furious. They said, well, Wellman's going to kill our stars. He's making them fly planes, So they started sending producers and people down to the location, and the first producer that arrived, actually a studio executive, my father knocked him on his butt. And they dragged him off and put him on a train, sent him home. So the next one that came down, my father said, you got two choices. You can either turn around, walk out now, or you're going to be dragged out just like the last one. So now the studio's thinking, we got to fire this maniac, But about that time, some of the aerial work started to come through, and they started to realize that it looked pretty good. But at one point, they sent the bankers, the three bankers that had their money in the film. And by the way, the $1.2 million budget is escalating all the time that they're not shooting. It became a $2 million production at a time when the average cost of a film, of a feature, was $250,000. So this was the most expensive film in history to that time. But again, now there were other problems. During the time when they're not able to film, they're waiting for clouds. What are you going to do with you got the army there? You got 5,000 troops. So my father he ordered, the studio to send down movies, and he started having beer parties and things like that for them. And now the Air Force and the Army, now they're getting upset. They didn't send their troops there to go to beer parties and dances, and now they're unhappy with that. So everybody's unhappy. They also started playing football on the airfield with an Air Force team and the Army team and the Hollywood team. And Bill Clothier, who was one of the 13 cameramen on the picture, who I got to know, and he became a very famous cinematographer and worked with my father and John Ford, and he was the center on the Hollywood football team, and he always said that the Hollywood team always won. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't remember my father answering that, but that's what Bill Clothier said. So anyway, the film was in production for such a long time, something like 9 months. My father always said it was 9 months because in the hotel, the St. Anthony Hotel where they all stayed, the elevator operators were women, and they all became pregnant, so he could remember that it was 9 months. And they were replaced by old men. But of course, it was quite an affair when you have a whole movie company down there, and you have Clara Bow, who was in love with, she loved men. There was no two ways about it, and everyone was in love with her. the stars of Wings, Buddy Rogers and Richard Arlen. Also, another big movie being directed by Victor Fleming was shooting at the same time, and they all were in love with Clara Bow. And my father said it was the most amazing thing how she handled all these men, each one of them thinking that they were the number one. There was never any fights. They never ran into each other. I mean, she had it all worked out, but she finally tired of it too, and she decided, and she told everyone that she was engaged to Victor Fleming, so that would put an end to that. So anyway, the picture, another interesting thing about the picture is the stunt pilots. Now, the world of stunt pilots was so new. I mean, these guys were they were barnstormers, and they didn't really have a lot of experience in movie flying. So one of the first things that my father did when they arrived on location was he took a Fokker D7 and he said to the stunt pilots, "Now I'm going to show you how you crash a plane." Now, of course, my father had a lot of experience in that, but these were not scheduled ones. This was a scheduled one. So my father took off and he flew around the field in the German Fokker, and then he came in, landed, and flipped it over and showed them. And that actually was the last time my father flew. He never flew later in life. I mean, I think he figured he had done enough. But these stunt pilots were fantastic. So my father stayed on. They never fired him. The studio never fired him. But when they opened the picture in August of 1927 in New York at the Criterion Theater, 893-seat theater, the place was packed. And the picture at $2 ticket prices, which was, boy, that was big. They started to realize that they might have had something special. And the picture played first run for 2 solid years. Now, even sound, talkies came in 2 months after Wings opened. And now they took Wings out of distribution for a short time and added sound effects and tried to add some sound to it. And it went back into first run. And it played for over 2 years. The picture made millions. And when the Academy Awards rolled around in 1929, they included pictures made in 27 and 28. It won the best picture. They called it the best production the first year. Then they changed that later on and called it was best picture. So that's sort of the story of Wings, and that's really what put my father on the map. But the studio never forgave him for his insolence, disrespect, and he became a prankster around the Paramount lot. Now, he had a 7-year contract, and he loved to yell cursory words up to the president and the executives up in their offices, and he would lock their dining room doors so they couldn't come out. And he was driving an old Essex, which was his first car that he ever had. And they said, "You can't drive this. You got to get a Packard or a Cadillac or something, you know, your stature as a Paramount director." And he said, "This is the car I want. This is the car I like." In fact, when my father did his next picture after Wings, it was another aviation film called Legion of the Condemned, and he had the painters, the plane painters, paint his car camouflage brown and green with splotches, the way his camouflage was on his planes. And he drove that around the studio. So, you know, my father didn't like their interference, and they didn't like my father around. So eventually my father left Paramount and went to Warner Brothers, where he had a tremendous career, and he went on to directing 76 films, and his films received 32 Academy Award nominations and 7 Oscars. Although I never thought my father got the recognition he deserved, because he was a maverick. The people that he fought with were the people that give out the awards. So, but he never cared about awards. In fact, I always felt a passion in my career to do something that could shine a light on his career. And while he was still alive, I tried to get a movie made of his life at Columbia Studios in 1965. I was starring in a movie that was shooting at Columbia called Winter a Go-Go. Now, that was a beach party movie with snow on the ground. And at that time, that was the only movie, shooting at Columbia Studios. And I went to, so I got to know the head of the studio would come down to watch Winter a Go-Go being shot because there was nothing else to look at. And I got to know him, and I tried to get them to take an interest in doing a movie on my father's life, which I'm still working on, and I've been close. But my father said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, Dad, I if I can do something." He says, "Look, I don't care. Why do you care?" But I have cared. And I wrote a television special called Wild Bill in 1971. But it took me 25 years to get that made as a documentary called Wild Bill Hollywood Maverick, a 94-minute documentary. And I had two fabulous partners, Todd Robinson and Ken Carlson. Without them, I wouldn't have it. But I got that done, and I have presented my father's films in 5 countries. I'm just finishing my second book on his life. So I think I've done my father never had a retrospective of his work in this country. And when he was 73 years old, I produced one for him, and we showed over 40 of his films, and that was the only retrospective he ever had in the United States. So I've done quite a bit, and I'm always happy to do it, and I'm happy to be here and talking to you and talk about his life and his films. It's important to me. And the only thing I haven't done is the movie. And I had Sean Penn for a while interested in playing my father, and this is maybe 13, 14 years ago. I wanted an actor who could look in his 20s, who could play like 20 and then as old as my father got, which was 79. And 2 years ago, Disney was interested from my book that I brought here. They wanted to make a movie out of the book. And then they got scared off when this movie Flyboy, that maybe some of you people have seen, a movie about World War I pilots, and it tanked at the box office, and they kind of got scared off. But I still think, somebody will want to do it because my father's life is so amazing, so adventurous. I mean, he had 5 marriages. I mean, whatever area you want. I think he would marry anyone who would date him twice for a while until he met my mother, and somehow she tamed him in her quiet way. Now, my mother was a Busby Berkeley chorus dancer, and she danced in all those Busby Berkeley musicals that were so fantastic in the late 1920s and into the 30s. 42nd Street and Gold Diggers of 33 and Show of Shows and all these. So, I mean, if you can imagine, at the time my father married her, he was 37 and she was 18. That was his 5th marriage. Now, he married a movie star, a Ziegfeld Folly showgirl. They never lasted very long. So no one gave his last marriage any chance either. One of his wives was an aviatrix, and she was very famous back in the 30s. Sound. Well, it's an airplane. This is the kind of background we want, don't we? She knew famous women pilots of the era, and she had her own plane. And when my father, and her name was Marjorie Crawford, when they went to get married, he didn't have to hire somebody to fly him there because she flew him there in her plane, So there's so much of my father's life that would make a great movie, I think. Now, what I'd like to do is open it up to questions and answers, because, I mean, I can talk about my father for weeks, but I'd rather talk about the things that you all are most interested in hearing about. So if there are any questions, you know, raise your hand, and we'll do some Q&A. He's asking me how I put together all my father's information, his life and everything. First of all, I was very close to my father. I spent particularly the last 4 or 5 years of my father's life, because he wrote, after he quit the business, he didn't retire. He said, I quit. See, he didn't like the way it was going, because even though he fought with those moguls, he respected them because they knew film. And it became a business where conglomerates, you know, business entities were running the studios, and it was all falling apart. It wasn't, they weren't the factories that they were, the glamour factories, shall we say. So as I started to try to do something to shine a light on his career, I would get more involved in the research, and it just all kept coming. In fact, after everything that I've done, and my new book, which is coming out in April, which is a complete biography of his life and times, I still haven't told it all. There's so much. The more research I do, the more people I listen to, the more things I find out about his life. When my father, this is the honest truth. When my father got leukemia, and it took him in 3 months, partly because he wouldn't take any radiation or chemotherapy. When he was told that he had leukemia, and I was with him at the hospital, at St. John's Hospital, and there were 2 cancer specialists and our family doctor. And when they told my father, he said, it's funny because one of the specialists, the first thing he said when my father walked in the room, he says, "Oh, Mr. Wellman, I just want you to know, I love your pictures. I saw the High and the Mighty 3-4 times." My father said, "Cut the crap. What have I got?" And so he said, "Well, you have leukemia, acute myelogenous leukemia." And my father said, "That's cancer, isn't it?" "Yes, that's cancer." And then the family doctor was a wonderful guy, and he came in and said, "Now, Bill, there's lots of things that can be done." And my father said, "How much time have I got?" And the family doctor went on, "They have radiation." And he says, "Cut it out, Dick." His name was Dick Miller. "How much time have I got?" And one of the specialists said, 3 months. And my father said, "Okay, I don't want to stay in the hospital. I want to go home. I want to die at home." And it's amazing. It was almost 3 months to the day, without any treatment, that he passed away. And as he was lying on his bed the last week, and I went in to talk with him, and I was having trouble holding it together. I still have trouble holding it together, but I started to lose it, and he said, "Bill, don't feel sorry for me. I've lived the life of 100 men." And I knew he had. I knew he had.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.